Let's review these contradictory claims. 1. On the pad at Kennedy Spaceport, the entire ship is cooled by conventional air conditioning. 2. The entire ship is air conditioned in space. 3. When you turn off the ship's air conditioning, the ship gets colder. 4. The LEM had no air conditioning, so it got even colder. There is a lesson for homeowners this summer. When it's broiling hot out and your air conditioner overloads and can't cool the house, turn it off and make the house cooler. It worked for NASA. Are you beginning to see why I call these men astronauts? In addition to Apollo 13, Ralph is also skeptical of the earlier mission Gemini 5, flown by astronaut Gordon Cooper and Pete Conrad. Much like Apollo 13, this mission became increasingly cold after a damaged fuel cell forced the crew to switch off the air conditioner. On his website, Windley claims that the reason Apollo 13 became cold was because the command capsule's skin reflected away most of the sun's heat. However, the crew spent most of their time in the lunar module, not the CSM.
Aboard Apollo, it's plain survival. The crew abandons the command module, which is short of oxygen. They move into the tiny lunar lander, a life raft that carries them around the moon and limping back to Earth.
In addition to avoiding all the information we've just presented, Windley also neglects to tell his readers what Apollo 12 astronaut Alan Bean told the now-retired Bart Sabrell when asked along these lines.
If the LEM didn't have climate control, and had air in it, would it be hot or cold without the climate control?
If you just took a lunar module, and well, let's take the climate control and it fails. All right, what happens then? You've got air setting there, it's 70 degrees. If the lunar module is setting in the sun, which it always is, then slowly but surely that temperature inside is going to go up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Now you ain't going to make it because you're going to cook long before that.
You heard it, straight from the horse's mouth. If the sunlit LEM's climate control fails, or in the case of Apollo 13, shuts down, it's going to get broiling inside. Returning to Renee's letter to Tom Hanks, he goes on to point out the other problems with Apollo 13. This lack of electrical power included the fact that they knew the powerful engine would no longer fire, starved as it was of the electrical energy needed for ignition and burn. Without it, they couldn't get into orbit around the moon. More importantly, without it, they wouldn't be able to get home. At this time, I wish to insert the sequences of a normal Apollo mission so that we may compare them to what NASA claims happened after the explosion. 1. Liftoff. 2. The booster's first stage shuts down, detaches, and the second stage fires. 3. The second stage shuts down, detaches, and the third stage fires. The third stage shuts down when the craft is in Earth orbit. The third stage fires again to accelerate the craft towards the moon. The CSM detaches from the third stage, which holds the LEM in the top section. The command module links nose to nose with the LEM. The third stage detaches, and the large engine in the service module makes up to 3 mid-course corrections. The service module slows down to attain lunar orbit. The LEM, using its lower stage, lands on the moon. The LEM's upper stage detaches and carries 2 men back to join the command service module. The LEM is abandoned in lunar orbit, and the service module is fired to take the ship back to Earth. The service engine makes mid-course corrections. It is a fact, during the years of the NASA Apollo missions, the press had an acronym for NASA, which was never a straight answer. Because NASA consistently lies, I used some assumptions to investigate how the crippled Apollo 13 returned to Earth. Exact figures would have been as hard to get as it is to buy their Apollo pictures. Right from the beginning, the above concept was touted as the ultimate safety factor. NASA claims that once started towards the moon, a ship would return to Earth without using the engine at all. Even if true, the trip would have been greatly extended in time because they would have run past the moon tens of thousands of miles before they were pulled back. The Apollo 13 came directly back to Earth. The service vehicle carried about 54,000 pounds of fuel. And let us assume that all three mid-course corrections were made, which burned 4,000 pounds of fuel. This left them at step 9 with 50,000 pounds of fuel. The command capsule weighed over 13,000 pounds, and the service vehicle without fuel was 33,000 pounds. The LEM weighed over 33,000 pounds and held 17,800 pounds of available fuel in the lower stage. At that time, the total machine weight was 129,000 pounds. Aldrin reported that it took a 6-minute burn of the service module's engine to deaccelerate the ship enough to attain lunar orbit. He also reports that to send the craft back to Earth took a 2.5-minute burn, which consumed 5 tons of fuel. This means that the surface engine, which had no throttle, burned 2 tons of fuel per minute. Therefore, the burn to acquire lunar orbit normally required a minimum of 12 tons of fuel. That's 24,000 pounds. According to NASA, lunar orbit was attained by using the LEM's engine. Since the LEM only had 17,800 pounds of fuel, this was 6,200 pounds less than normally needed. Without fuel to achieve lunar orbit, somehow they found enough to return to Earth. Normally, they burnt off most of the 50,000 pounds of fuel in the service module and left the entire LEM orbiting the moon. That left about 15,000 pounds of fuel, 13,000 pounds of command capsule, 33,000 pounds of service module, for a total of 51,000 pounds. However, the Apollo 13 weighed 129,000 pounds minus the 17,800 pounds of fuel they burned attaining lunar orbit. The total weight was now 111,200 pounds, or twice as heavy as normal. If it normally took 5 tons to propel them back to Earth, it would have to require over twice as much to return the Apollo 13. This, of course, did not take into consideration the mid-course corrections. It would probably have required over 20 tons for that burn, but I leave that for a rocket scientist to calculate. The miracle here is that the ship got back to Earth by burning tons of fuel they didn't have. As I said in the beginning, Apollo 13 is a science fiction movie. During a radio interview, Kaysing had this to say about the very science fiction movie Tom Hanks starred in.
I've seen it, and I examined it very carefully, and I found a tremendous anomaly in it. They show the exhaust of the lunar lander model engine as being a yellow gold. Well, the fuels used on the lunar module were nitrogen tetroxide and unsymmetrical dimethyl hydrazine, which produce a opaque red gas. So their technical experts on Apollo 13 weren't really with it, because otherwise they would have created a red, opaque gas as the emission from the lunar rocket engine.
In the footage of the ascent stage going up, what you don't see is an exhaust plume coming out of the rocket engine nozzle.
What a ride, what a ride.
But what do we see? We see the ascent stage suddenly pop up without any exhaust plume whatsoever, as though it were jerked up by a cable.
In response to this argument, the propagandists usually insist that the exhaust plume of the lunar module is supposed to be invisible. What these individuals do not reveal on their websites is what astronauts Alan Shepard and Deke Slayton had to say when talking about Apollo 8's trans-Earth injection. At the scheduled moment, Borman, Lovell and Anders felt the flaring engine bell hurl forth a long stream of flame, emitting a wide plume of glowing plasma gas behind them. Keep in mind that the lunar module and service module both use the same fuels. I've never heard of an invisible glowing gas.